"By sacred law, I owe you offspring for saving me, Cowboy," the Apache Widow said with a smile. The sun was setting over the vast plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Dust swirled in the dry wind as the cowboy rode slowly along the trail, his horse moving steadily, its hooves crunching against the hard earth. He had been traveling alone for days, following a route that wound through canyons and rocky hills, seeking neither trouble nor company. The cowboy was a man of quiet strength, known in small frontier towns for his skill with the horse and rifle, and for the way he seemed to move through danger without hesitation. Far off the main trail, hidden in a shallow valley surrounded by twisted oak trees and prickly bushes, a woman sat alone beside a small fire. Her hair, dark and long, hung loosely around her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp yet tinged with sadness, watched the smoke rise into the sky. She was an Apache widow, recently left alone after a violent raid had taken the lives of her husband and many of her people. She had survived, but the grief weighed heavily on her heart, and the isolation made every sound in the wilderness seem louder, more threatening. As the cowboy rode closer, he noticed signs of struggle. Broken branches, footprints in the soft earth, and the faint, desperate smell of smoke from the woman's fire reached him. His instincts sharpened. He slowed his horse, scanning the area carefully. He had seen many dangers in these lands, hostile men, wild animals, and the unpredictable wrath of nature. But something about the scene ahead made him alert in a different way. He could sense that someone needed help. The woman, too, had noticed him. At first, she tensed, reaching instinctively for a small knife hidden in her belt. She had learned from hard experience that travelers could be as dangerous as raiders. But when their eyes met, she saw no malice in the stranger's gaze, only caution and respect. He dismounted, tying his horse securely to a nearby tree, and approached slowly, hands visible to show he carried nothing threatening. "I don't mean any harm," the cowboy said in a calm, steady voice. His tone carried reassurance, as if the words themselves could ease her fear. "I saw signs you might need help." She could see the weariness in his face, the dust on his coat, and yet there was a quiet strength in the way he stood. She realized that this man was different from the others she had encountered since the raid. He did not judge. He did not assume. He simply observed. After a long pause, she spoke. "I am alone," she said softly, her voice almost lost to the wind. "And I am not in danger from man, but the land can be cruel." The warmth of the flames was comforting, but more than that, there was a sense of protection in having another person nearby. The cowboy did not speak more than necessary, allowing silence to stretch between them. In that silence, the widow found something she had not felt in weeks, a small sense of safety. As the evening deepened, the wind picked up, carrying a chill through the valley. The widow shivered, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Without a word, the cowboy removed his coat and offered it to her. She hesitated, then accepted, noticing the rough, worn fabric that smelled faintly of leather and smoke. There was a kindness in the gesture that touched her heart, reminding her of the humanity that still existed in a world that had taken so much from her. The night settled in fully, and the stars began to shine above, clear and bright in the open sky. The cowboy and the widow sat near the fire, sharing no words for a long time, only the quiet crackle of the flames and the distant howl of a coyote. Slowly, the widow began to speak, telling him stories of her people, of the traditions that guided them, and of the life she had known before the raid. Her words were measured, careful, yet there was a warmth in sharing her memories with someone who listened without judgment. The cowboy listened, intrigued. He had met many people in his travels, but there was something about this woman's resilience, her quiet strength, that fascinated him. He asked questions gently, respecting her boundaries, and she answered, finding comfort in the simple act of being heard. They spoke of the land, the dangers that lurked in the wilderness, and the importance of courage and honor. In this exchange, a bond began to form, one built on mutual respect, understanding, and the unspoken recognition of each other's strength. Suddenly, a noise in the brush startled them both. The widow's hand went to the knife at her belt, and the cowboy's hand hovered near his holster. But it was only a small deer, frightened by the presence of humans. They laughed softly at their own tension, the sound easing the fear that had gripped them. In that moment, the widow realized that she felt safe with this man in a way she had not felt since her husband's death. As the night grew colder, the cowboy offered to help secure her shelter. Together, they reinforced the small lean she had built, using branches and leaves to protect against the wind. He showed her a few techniques to make the fire burn longer and safer, while she shared knowledge of the land, where water could be found, and which paths were safe to travel. Their collaboration was silent at first, each learning from the other, and then a quiet companionship began to emerge, formed not from words but from shared effort and respect. When the work was done, they sat again by the fire, closer this time, sharing a meal of bread and dried meat. The widow smiled faintly, a gesture that the cowboy noticed immediately. He returned the smile, and in that simple exchange, a subtle understanding passed between them, a recognition of trust and gratitude. She did not speak of the debt she felt, the sacred law that bound her to repay kindness with more than words, but it lingered in her eyes. The cowboy noticed her hesitation but said nothing. He understood that gratitude could take many forms, and that some gestures were too sacred for immediate explanation. He simply remained near, a steady presence in the night, allowing her to feel the safety and warmth he offered. In the quiet of the wilderness, far from the chaos of towns and raiders, they began to understand each other in ways words could not capture. By the time the first light of dawn began to touch the valley, the cowboy had proven himself not just as a rescuer but as a companion, someone who would not leave in fear or doubt. The widow felt a small but growing sense of hope that she was not completely alone, and hope that there could be someone in the world who honored both life and the bonds that connected them to each other. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley as they prepared for the day ahead. The cowboy saddled his horse, ready to continue his journey, but he paused, looking at the widow with quiet respect. She met his gaze, a smile playing on her lips, one that spoke of gratitude, trust, and the unspoken promises that had begun to form between them. "You saved me," she said softly, almost to herself. "I owe you more than I can say." As he rode away, the widow watched him disappear over the ridge, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. She knew that the bond forged in the quiet of the valley was only the beginning. There was a law, sacred to her people, that would guide her actions, and she would honor it. But she also knew that the cowboy had earned her respect, her trust, and perhaps something more, in ways that were beyond words. And so, the story of their meeting ended with the first light of day, leaving both the cowboy and the widow changed forever, connected by courage, compassion, and the beginnings of a bond that neither time nor distance could easily break. The morning sun rose higher, casting a warm glow across the plains. The cowboy had returned to check on the widow, his horse carrying him steadily across the uneven ground. He had thought about her often since their first meeting in the valley. Something about her strength, her quiet dignity, and the deep sadness in her eyes had stayed with him. He knew the world could be harsh, but he also believed in the power of respect and honor, and he hoped his presence would ease her burden. The widow was waiting near her fire, the smoke curling into the clear sky. She had not expected him to return so soon, and for a moment she studied him in silence. His face was calm, his eyes steady, and there was a softness in his expression that made her feel safe. She remembered the danger she had faced before he came, the fear that had gripped her as the shadows moved across the land. He had saved her without hesitation, without expecting anything in return, and that courage had left a lasting mark on her heart. "Good morning," the cowboy said gently, tipping his hat. "I thought I should check on you." He did not speak of the law she had hinted at, but he could sense its presence in the way she held herself. Her people valued respect, loyalty, and courage above all, and he understood that his actions had touched something deep within her world. For several days, the cowboy stayed near the widow, helping her with tasks that had once been simple when she had been part of a larger community but had become difficult alone. He gathered firewood, repaired fences, and helped hunt small game for food. Each act was done with quiet care, never forcing himself upon her, always offering support in ways that were respectful and kind. The widow observed him closely, noting his patience, his humility, and the way he listened before acting. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, she spoke of the sacred law of her people. Her voice was calm, but there was an intensity in her eyes. In our tribe, when someone saves your life, it is not enough to offer words alone, she explained. There is a law that binds us to repay the debt. It is a law of respect, of life, and of honor. You have saved me, and now I must honor you according to our traditions. Instead, he felt a profound respect for the depth of her culture and the seriousness with which she regarded life and duty. I understand, he said finally, keeping his voice gentle, and I respect your traditions. I only ask that you guide me so I may honor them as you do. She was pleased not only by his words but by the tone, which conveyed understanding rather than fear or dismissal. It was rare to meet someone who could truly respect another's ways without judgment, and in that moment, she felt a sense of hope for a future she had not thought possible. Over the next days, their bond grew stronger. They worked side by side, sharing stories of their lives and learning from one another. The widow taught the cowboy about the land, the plants and herbs that could heal minor wounds, the safest paths to travel, and the ways to live in harmony with the environment. He shared his knowledge of survival, showing her how to track game more efficiently, how to set up a strong camp, and how to anticipate the weather. Their exchanges were rich with learning, and through them, mutual respect deepened into trust. One morning, a sudden storm rolled across the plains. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and the wind began to howl. The widow's small shelter would not hold against such fury alone, and she realized she needed help to protect herself and her few belongings. The cowboy was ready. Together, they reinforced her shelter, securing the roof with branches and digging small trenches to prevent water from seeping in. They worked in silence, the sound of the storm mixing with the crackle of small fires to keep them warm. When the storm passed, the valley was quiet and damp, the earth smelling fresh. They sat together near the fire, exhausted but satisfied. The widow looked at the cowboy, and this time her words carried the weight of both gratitude and resolve. "The law I spoke of, it is not a burden," she said softly. "It is a promise that when life is given back to us, it must be honored in full." She had seen many men in her life, but few had spoken with such sincerity. In the weeks that followed, they continued to share the days, helping each other survive and thrive. The widow began to feel a peace she had not known in a long time. She was still grieving, but the presence of the cowboy brought comfort, a reminder that even in a world filled with hardship, human kindness could shine brightly. One afternoon, while tending a small garden of herbs and vegetables she had begun planting, the widow turned to the cowboy. "You have saved me not only from danger but from despair," she said. "I owe you more than life itself. By our law, I am bound to honor you fully. It is not just for the past but for all the days ahead." Slowly, the widow's smile became more frequent, her laughter more natural, and her steps lighter. The bond between them was no longer just one of gratitude and duty, but of friendship, respect, and an unspoken connection that grew stronger with every shared experience. One evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of orange and purple, the cowboy helped the widow collect firewood. She paused to look at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "I have learned much from you," she said softly, "not just about survival, but about kindness, patience, and courage. You have taught me that life can be gentle, even after loss. Your strength, your knowledge, and the way you honor your people's traditions, it has reminded me what true courage is." The sacred law that had brought them together was no longer a weight but a guiding principle, a reminder of the respect and trust they shared. As the weeks passed, the cowboy decided to stay longer, not out of obligation but out of choice. He and the widow developed routines, shared meals, and spent long evenings by the fire, speaking of dreams, hopes, and the beauty of the land around them. There was no rush, no pressure, only the steady growth of a bond built on mutual respect and understanding. The widow often smiled at the cowboy, remembering the day he had saved her. "By your courage," she said one evening, "and by your respect, you have given me a life I thought was lost." The law I follow is clear, but it is also filled with gratitude, and gratitude is a gift I wish to share with you every day. They continued their days in the valley, facing whatever challenges came with patience, courage, and trust. In each other, they found not just companionship but a living example of the sacred law, honoring life, honoring kindness, and honoring the bonds that connect people across time and circumstance. And so their story continued, quiet yet powerful, a tale of bravery, respect, and the extraordinary ways human connection can flourish even in the wildest and harshest of lands. The cowboy had saved the widow, but in return she had offered him something just as precious: her trust, her respect, and a bond that would last far beyond the days they spent together in the valley.